Our final speaker for today is Dr. Damon Smith, Extension Field Crops Pathologist at UW-Madison and Professor in the Department of Plant Pathology at UW-Madison. Today, Damon will give a mid-season disease update.
All right, thanks, Josh. Everything sound good on your end?
Yes.
Okay. All right, if you don't want to listen to me drone on today, or you're busy doing something else while you're getting your CUs, feel free to check out this article I wrote on Monday. This talk will be a kind of a synopsis of that article. So most everything I say here is included there, and that QR code will take you direct to that blog article there. It's been a tale of two seasons for me. Last season, I was not very popular because of the extremely dry weather. This year, I'm very popular and been getting quite a few questions. And really, they revolve around two diseases. I'm sure everybody knows which two those are. So I'm going to spend some time there on those two. Of course, white mold. In soybeans, I do want to just talk about the disease cycle very quickly because this is very important. Everybody sort of forgets about the disease cycle when they're thinking about making these fungicide applications. And this year, this is extremely important because we have a very uneven crop. Even within the field, we can have very uneven crop. And so I want to just talk about some of the biology here for a minute and in hopes that this can help you think a little more about that decision to spray or not. So remember, you do have to have kind of moderate temperatures. We've been right in the zone of moderate temperatures, and I'll talk about a little more about what those are here in a bit. But really, when we're looking at monthly averages that hover right around, low 70s into the upper 60s, which Ed showed us earlier, we're kind of in that range. That's good temperature. We definitely need to have some moisture, but that moisture doesn't necessarily have to always come from rain. We've had a good amount of rain this year, but we've also had ample humidity. And so that's another really important piece. Now that weather has to all come together when the canopy closes. So if you're in a 30-inch row spacing situation, you need between row closure of at least 40%. Okay, so they have to be pretty closed. If you're in a 15-inch row spacing situation, you will meet that row closure threshold. So that's not something to consider in the 15-inch row spacing, but certainly something to consider in the 30-inch row spacing. And then on top of that, on top of having that weather, the canopy closure, you have to have blooms. Okay, you can't have infection in soybean by the white mold fungus unless you have flowers or senescing flowers there. So your window of opportunity for the fungus, if the weather lines up and you have that canopy closure, is during the bloom time. Anything that unsinks those three things, all right, so if they get somehow unsynced, then the risk is not there, okay? And this is a very important key piece here because, some of the early planted soybeans have already pushed through kind of the susceptible window. I've also seen soybeans that are in full bloom and have not met the between row 40% row closure threshold. These are all cases where you can hold off for now and kind of watch what's happening until you're outside of that susceptible window. Okay, so be honest with yourself. Go out, look at the crop, scout things. I would say, 50% of the crop is still kind of in that susceptible window. You might have an opportunity to put a fungicide on. If the bulk of the crop is already through that susceptible window and you still haven't put a fungicide on, this is a good year to maybe hold off in that particular situation. So keep that in mind. To try to put the whole weather thing together, you probably are all familiar with Sporecaster. We've since improved Sporecaster in a new tool called Field Prophet. Field Prophet's also an app, but it includes all the models that we have. So it's on all the crops. So now you can go to one place, you can look at it. I like the Field Prophet version a lot better too, because you get a 7-day trend, and you can see down here, this is a recent white mold trend line. This is much more informative, in my opinion, to be able to look at what the 7-day history has been in terms of risk. When you see a positive trajectory of that risk line, risk is going up. Even if it's not in the high, but it's going to cross there. This is an indication for you that you need to be on it and out there scouting the crop and looking at the growth stages and those sorts of things. You can also get a 7-day true forecast. So you can go in and change that date and actually run a true 7-day look ahead to see what's coming at you. The other nice thing about it is once you set your fields, you can actually look at a map of those fields. So I do this for the whole state. And this is in that tool. And so here's the latest white mold risk map. You can see everywhere but the southeast, we've got moderate to high risk for white mold right now. And this makes some sense. If I actually look ahead in the 7-day forecast, and Ed talked about this at the beginning, we're looking at kind of moderate temps and maybe some shots of precipitation again. And so that's going to continue to push the white mold risk higher and higher and higher. And so keep an eye on things. If you're again in that risk window, you're going to need to make sure you're taking some time to get out there and make that fungicide decision. I've been getting a lot of questions on fungicide products. There's nothing really new and magical out there. I'm sorry to say. We do have a very finite group of products that actually have white mold on the label and have some decent efficacy. We do track the fungicide efficacy in a national program, the Crop Protection Network. We release those efficacy charts each year. Wisconsin data is included in those efficacy charts, and I would encourage you to take some time and study that chart. That is university research-based information. It's the consensus among all the plant pathologists, soybean plant pathologists in the country. And we also do the same thing in corn as well. Very useful so that you can have good confidence in the product you're choosing actually has some efficacy there. If you like more local type data, of course, my fungicide test summaries are available. That QR code will take you to 11 years worth of fungicide summaries. Don't just look at 2023, although you're probably tempted to go there. Make sure you're digging back back a couple of years to kind of look at how products are performing over time. I like to see consistency in products. I don't want to see 1 year where one product worked really well and then it doesn't work again, right? So you want to see which are kind of keeping up and continue to hold in our environment. I was asked to take some time then to talk a little about the ROI decision. And it's been a couple of years since I've actually talked about this tool that we developed a few years back called Spore Buster. This was some work that we did in conjunction with Sean Conley and also Paul Mitchell, our ag economist here at UW. And we built some ROI tools, and we actually automated those ROI tools in an app called Spore Buster. And it's probably a good year to actually download this tool and have it on your phone so that you can run some scenarios for your farm. And what I did here is I ran these two scenarios here just this morning. So these are fresh, kind of looking at the current futures market here in terms of sale of soybeans. So I use 10.75 per bushel for my expected sale price. So you can see that up in the upper left-hand box here. And then I put an average expected yield of 70 bushels per acre. In white mold, this is a high yield disease. And so your yields are going to be a little bit higher if you're really pushing the crop. And so I think 70 bushels is probably a good place to look here. You can then adjust by disease pressure. And I ran two scenarios. On the left, we have a low disease pressure situation. In the right-hand side, a high disease pressure. You can actually go in, these boxes in the treatment cost column do default to some standard pricing, but you have the luxury of actually changing those boxes as well for whatever your local treatment cost might be for a particular product. So I just left the defaults in here just so you can get an idea, but you're more than welcome to download this. You can run different scenarios and change the inputs into those boxes, and that list will change and automate. So a couple of things I want to point out. First is, and probably most important, is a break-even probability. So this is the probability that you're actually going to get your money back on the product. Then you can go to the average net gain column and understand, all right, if I'm going to break even, what is the average net gain across all the locations that we looked at in our modeling? And you see there, in a low disease situation, the break-even probabilities are kind of sluggish. And the average net gains aren't really great for most of the products. In fact, a lot of them on average become negative in some cases. So you gotta kind of look at this and be honest with yourself and really understand what's going on here. Of course, in a high disease situation, the break-even probabilities become a little more, a bit higher, and in fact, in some cases, look pretty good. And then the average net gains indeed do become positive generally in those situations. So really the moral of the story here, and how are we going to make this decision? We've got, an uneven crop out there. Some of the crop is going to be at risk. I think things that are kind of in that early bloom, full bloom stage right now, they're at risk. If you know you have white mold in a particular field, you have a susceptible variety or high planting populations, these are all things which really increase the end of season risk and give you that high disease pressure. Those are going to be the fields that I would focus on and probably consider spending the money on those acres. I don't know how fancy I would get in this market. I don't know if you need to go out there and put 8 ounces of Endura on. I think you need to run those scenarios for your pricing, your local pricing, and see what that looks like and how you feel about those odds. But maybe consider a product if you're in that window. Now, if you're already through bloom, the canopy hasn't closed yet, you haven't met that threshold, you're on a light seeding rate, those are all cases where you may be able to just get away with not spraying this year. And that's a good way to save some money and help the bottom line a bit in terms of making this decision. Now let's switch gears here. I'm going to move into tar spot and kind of talk about what's going on there. This is the map as of this morning, so we track this nationally. Kind of zoomed in on the Midwest here just to show you what's going on in the Midwest and locally here in Wisconsin. We do have several sort of centralized areas right now in terms of where we've had some reports with some in the Northwest. We got Kewanee, then Washera, and then kind of along that southern tier there are sort of the four main areas of the state where we have picked up some tar spot. Now, I want to caution you, we light up counties if we find one tar spot. And I can tell you that all the images I've been sent, including the scouting we've been doing myself, the severities are very low right now. And usually the placement in general, not in all cases, but the placement in general of those lesions has been in the lower part of the canopy. Those of you who followed some of the modeling know that it was very, very conducive early in the season. Those infections happen then. This thing has a very long, what we call incubation period, from the time that it infects the plant to when we actually see those stroma develop. Our prediction tools truly are a look into the crystal ball. You're looking at what are the conditions, and am I going to have, is there a high likelihood that I'm going to have disease, say 30 days from now? Okay, so it makes some sense that those lesions are in the bottom. Then we got hot, a little bit dry, and that slowed things down. We're kind of in that slow period right now. I am expecting that to move up, and if I look ahead at the 7-day, we do become higher risk in terms of tar spot development. So we do need to be careful of that and kind of keep track of what's going on there in terms of tar spot progression. Of course, we've got our tools. Field Profit also runs the tar spot tool as well. Here's the map. Again, low to moderate, except for maybe the very southern part of Wisconsin, given the current conditions. So if you're kind of coming into tassel, if you're in the northern third of the state, you're kind of coming into tassel, I'd be looking at this and watching what's going on. I would encourage you maybe to try to hold off just a bit. I don't think we have an immediate concern. Yes, the risk is high, but I would really like to see it kind of hold that fungicide application as late towards R3 as you can. In terms of products, I mentioned we have that efficacy chart for corn, just like with soybean. Spend some time there. You'll notice actually there's quite a few products which have good efficacy against tar spot. In general, you are going to need the 2 or 3-way mixed modes of action. We do know that. But you can find the efficacy data for tar spot as well as the other diseases, gray leaf spot and northern corn leaf blight, or some other things that we have to keep track of. Luckily, in this case, we have a good set of products which actually cover all of those diseases. So the hope is if you got to spray, you only got to do it once. And you're going to get protection for all 3 of those, as risk it could elevate for all of those diseases as we move into the later reproductive stages. Now, just like with soybean, we've been working on some return on investment calculators for corn as well. We actually just launched this tool through the Crop Protection Network just this week. So it went live just this week. This is some data we've been working on since 2019, and then we partnered with the Data Science Institute here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison to actually build upon the work that Paul Mitchell and myself had done back in 2019 on some soybean data that went into the spore buster tool. We actually expanded that work and actually automated those models, retrained everything for the corn world, and then we have actually been able to place that online through the Crop Protection Network for your use. And this is an interactive tool. It's something that you can go in and you can actually run some scenarios in there. You can change things around in terms of disease levels, expected yield, expected commodity prices. You see, I ran a scenario there in that screenshot looking at $5 corn price, which is probably a little bit optimistic at the moment. But you can see, again, you get some break-even probabilities and expected net benefits. And that whole thing will change as you change the boxes. So you could also enter your local pricing and all those sorts of things. I do want to mention that, again, just like with the soybean tool, you want to use that break-even probability column first and kind of look at what the odds are. You're going to notice that, in the lower disease situations, when the price is soft, there's not a lot of high break-even probabilities in that tool, or at least predicted based on our simulations. But in some cases, you will find some positive break-evens, and then you can go to that expected net benefit column and kind of understand, all right, what is the average net benefit there? Again, when the market's good, when we're in a $6 corn market and we got high disease around, spraying a fungicide kind of becomes a no-brainer from a return on investment standpoint. But this year is not one of those years. We got, again, a lot of uneven crop out there. We need to make some decisions on whether we're going to spray or not. And then I don't know how fancy I would be with my fungicide choice there. If you're gonna spray, maybe look at the ROI calculator here, see what things are gonna give you a good price, and maybe elevate that break-even probability a bit. And then I would wait as late in that VT to R3 window as you can. I understand that plane availability becomes an issue, but if you can push that application back in that window a bit, that'll give you good coverage in those late reproductive stages as far as you can. So take those things into consideration and just try to concentrate on that. With that, I know it was quick, but I wanted to make sure that there was ample time for questions for both Sean and myself. And so before I stop the screen share, I do want to just show where my contact information is. My email is probably the best. That's a really great way of getting in touch with me. So damon.smith@wis.edu. You can follow me on X or Twitter or whatever we call it these days at Badger Crop Doc. And then, of course, the website, badgercropdoc.com, and we have the blog right on the front page there. You can actually subscribe to that blog and you can get updates when I post. And so with that, I'm gonna stop share here and then make sure we have some time for some questions there, Josh.
All right, sounds good. Thanks a lot, Damon, for also sharing your time and expertise with us today. Damon, a quick question for you. Other pathogen risks in our corn and soybean crops that are on your mind? You mentioned and talked in detail about white mold and tar spot, rightfully so. And then, your thoughts on the ROI, really having that be part of our decision-making tree. How do we balance that with that risk of our crop for performance and having that risk, I guess, of having that yield be a factor.
Yeah, these are all good questions. First off, I'm glad you asked about other diseases because I'd love to talk about other things besides tar spot and white mold, Josh. We actually are running some test tools. We're building tools actually for other diseases. I do have a beta testing tool actually looking at gray leaf spot. We have some northern corn leaf blight tools in the works. We've got a frog eye leaf spot tool for soybeans as well that we're validating this year as well. So if I actually look at those tools as well, my concern is not very high actually for frog eye right now in soybean. We just haven't had the heat that we need. We've had the moisture, but we haven't had the heat. And so that's a key piece in that one. So I don't think the risk there is going to be that high there. So, really our focus is going to be on white mold for us here in Wisconsin. That does change as you move south of Wisconsin and, mid-Illinois, but we've got a different environment there. In terms of corn, I'm kind of watching the gray leaf spot situation pretty carefully. If we get hot here, the risk is kind of moderate in our tool right now. And I looked ahead at the trajectory. If we do turn warm, that is going to be something that we need to keep an eye on. And then I always am concerned about northern and silage, especially BMR hybrids. That always seems to hit us right at chopping time, and it can really mess with optimal moisture. So those are some things that I think you need to keep track of. And I'm pretty certain we're going to have some northern that's going to show up here in August, especially on some susceptible hybrids, especially maybe the BMRs. So I'd keep an eye on that and make sure you're considering some management perhaps for especially those high risk crops. In terms of how do we balance the ROI and make the decisions? We got to get. I'm gonna take my professor hat off and I'm gonna put my Damon Smith personal opinion hat on for a moment. And I think we just need to get off the whole maximize yield no matter what it costs. I think, the attainable yield and economic yield are two different things. And this year is a year where you need to be honest with yourself on what the economic yield really is. What can you really afford out of that crop in terms of inputs? And, I'll just use Sean's group as an example. His students often go into the high yield contest. And it's really interesting, a lot of times they're not very input heavy there. They're doing some management stuff, not very input heavy, and they're right up there with the kitchen sink, right? And we did some work with Sean a few years back, looking at high seeding rates and low seeding rates and white mold control at Hancock. And it was stunning at 100,000 seeds. So we dropped 100,000, probably had around, I'd have to look at the I'd have to look at the stand counts, but probably had, in the 85 to 90,000 in terms of final stand. We also layered fungicides on top of that in heavy white mold environments. And basically the lower planting populations completely negated the need for a fungicide in those cases. And those plots out yielded the 160,000 with 8 ounces of Endura applied at R3. Right. So this is the other thing. If you've got a low seeding rate, you haven't met the row closure threshold, let's say in soybeans, you know, be honest. Be honest with the economic yield you got there and just pass on the fungicide this year. It's a good place, I think, to be able to cut that. Even if a little bit of disease shows up, you can withstand a lot of these hybrids and varieties can still withstand some disease there. So I think it is a year of hard learning for us. We've come off a couple of seasons where we could afford, a lot of inputs, and now we're having to look at where we can cut those. So it is important to be able to balance that. Certainly, acres that are heavily prone, you have a susceptible hybrid or variety, or you planted late, the risk is higher there, and you may need to give a look for those fields to get a fungicide app.
Thank you. Thank you again, Ed, Sean, and Damon for sharing your updates today.